Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guests.
We are most pleased to bring you a two-part series that is titled The Future of Human Rights in Idaho. I could not be more pleased than having the three guests that will be with us both this week and next week to discuss this very important and exciting topic. The future is going to be bright in Idaho as some plans are developing, and by the time this program airs, some of these will already be known publicly that are in the planning stages this time. In fact, I would introduce the program by indicating that with some of these plans as they unfold, will produce a great model for other parts of the country. I welcome to our program today, first of all, my friend Marshall Mend, who is a realtor in Idaho, and he's on the program particularly because of his devoted work for human rights, and he is one of the original board members and founders of the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations. Marshall, welcome to the program, and thank you for all you've done over the years for this topic that we're discussing today.
Thank you, Tony. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I'm equally happy to welcome my friend Ken Harwood. He is the executive director of the Association of Idaho Cities, and Ken has been very instrumental in moving the association to address a number of human rights issues. And Ken, as I welcome you to the program, you were here not long ago with your wonderful conference in Coeur d'Alene, and I think it was a historical day for the association and what you did at that conference. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Tony. It is such a delight and a pleasure to be here with you today.
And third, and my third friend here today that I'm so happy to introduce is Norm Gissel, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho. And Norm is equally devoted to human rights. He is a member of the board of directors, the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations, and he's also on the board of directors of the Human Rights Education Foundation. And Norm has received lots of publicity recently as one of the counsel in the successful case of his plaintiffs, the Kenans versus the Aryan nations. Norm, again, like I've with Ken and Marshall, thank you so much for all you do. It is a really, really long list of things that you contribute to the people of Idaho.
I appreciate that, Tony, and I again would echo what the other panelists have said, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it's an honor to talk about civil rights in Idaho.
Ken, may I start my question with you? And again, I've already introduced the topic, the future of human rights in Idaho. We have a record in the past of what has happened concerning an extensive number of laws combating hate crime. There's a number of policies in our state. There's a lot of civil rights groups, and the Idaho Human Rights Commission has been well known for its work. But rather than talking about the past, I would like for us to start out almost immediately with the future. Would you be so kind as to share with our viewers, from the perspective of the Association of Idaho Cities, some of the things that they have in place that they're working on since that conference that was emphasizing human rights?
Yes, and I'd love to do that, Tony. At the annual conference of the Association of Idaho Cities, which you recall real emphasis on human rights issues through a week of training and workshops, the outcome was the membership approved a resolution that created a human rights task force within the Association of Idaho Cities. That task force will be working now statewide with elected officials, linking arms with yourself and the Human Rights Education Foundation here and Human Rights Education Center in Boise and other groups all over the state to educate and to put together initiatives advancing human rights in Idaho.
Let's go into that a little bit further, because I am very much thinking along the line that this is going to be a unique model. There are other states have unique models on different subjects and issues, but you mentioned the Idaho Human Rights Education Center, that Marilyn Schuler is the president of the board, and she's a former executive director of the Idaho Human Rights Commission and government. And then we have the Human Rights Education Foundation here that I just mentioned that Norm is a board member of. Tell us a little more about how those independent, nonprofit, 501c3 human rights groups can work with your association, which is an association of governments, cities throughout Idaho. So this is my very long comment is that human rights pride organizations is coming into partnership with really grassroots government around the state. What, from your visionary viewpoint, do you see happening in that partnership?
Well, Tony, I think, as you said, it very well could be a model for the rest of the nation. It may be a first in terms of those same players coming together in a cooperative, collaborative way to work on human rights issues. And I also need to express gratitude to Greg Carr and the Carr Foundation for all of their financial support and personal commitment to this human rights campaign in Idaho. But I think it is a unique and a great opportunity now to bring together folks who have been long-time human rights workers and advocates, now with municipal leaders who have the power to and authority to convene people together, to use the office of mayor to propose and to motivate people on human rights issues.
Thank you. And I know that Greg Carr is giving money for staffing for 5 years the Human Rights Education Center, and I know you in the association is working with him also for coordinating staff to work with the cities in this subject matter.
Right.
Marshall, may I turn to you now, and as a member of the task force since 1981, you have worked on a lot of issues, but you also have come up with something that really fits into what Ken is talking about. I predict a new day in Idaho about working around the entire state on this question, and share with us at a board meeting recently what you came up with. One of your strengths in the whole process is advertising and communicating to the public about the issue, as you also do in your business. So share with us what your idea is and how you hope it will expand throughout the state.
Well, I believe we need to market Idaho for what it really is and for what it is going to be. And Idaho is basically the human rights state. And that's what we're going to market Idaho as. At least that's the way I see Idaho. With all the things that we've done throughout the state in Idaho, northern Idaho, southern Idaho, the whole state, we've had an image problem, and the image problem was definitely not deserved. I think we're going to have a new image, and the new image is going to be a true image of what Idaho really is, a state. Idaho will be the human rights state.
I'm going to ask, I didn't tell my staff that's unfair of them, but I'm going to hold up this poster, and they're getting it on camera, and this is
that's a rough draft of the
draft,
poster.
and it's not in color here
Right.
what we have, but this is one of the proposals that you're talking about. Idaho, the human rights state, could be used in literature, could be used on reader boards, could be, why don't you share an idea we had at lunch also, with the idea that every state's going to have a coin and they have a slogan on the coin, so maybe you want to use this opportunity to mention what might happen.
We'd like to see Idaho's quarter, that when it comes out in another 3 or 4 years, to be Idaho, the human rights state.
Just like Wyoming has a slogan, the equality state, because the first territory and state to give women the right to vote, for example. So you're known by those slogans.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
And that's what Idaho should be known for.
Thank you. Norm, let's turn to you now. I want to spend some time in a lot of this that's surfacing and things are happening has a relationship with something you've been involved in. You received a call in July 1998, and a woman by the name of Victoria Kenan and her son Jason Kenan had been a victim. And they came to you and you became the family attorney. I wish we had about 4 or 5 hours to let you share the significance of that case, but would you tell us a little bit about what happened, what the result is, and how that could tie in to what both Ken and Marshall talk about the future of Idaho?
Well, my two clients had been shot at and had been beaten and assaulted by members of the security force for an organization known as the Aryan Nations. The Aryan Nations, and is also the religious side of it is also known as the Church of Jesus Christ Christian. And it was this organization out on Rimrock Road, just north of Coeur d'Alene, about 10 miles, that had employed and engaged this security force. And this security force at about 9 o'clock at night in a July evening, chased these people down, shot up their car, and then assaulted them. And that was the genesis of a criminal action against the assaulting security force members, 2 of which are presently in jail, as one or both may be out by the time this is aired, but they're presently in jail as we make this conversation, or as we have this conversation in September of 2000. But also on the tails of that criminal prosecution, there was a civil prosecution that was filed, and in the course of preparing for that litigation, I engaged the services of the Southern Poverty Law Center and Morris Dees, Richard Cohn, and Pete Tepley. A finer trio of attorneys cannot be found in the United States, and they agreed at that time to come on board and assist in this, in the plaintiff's work of bringing this case to trial. And then shortly after that, we engaged also the services on a volunteer basis of Ken Howard, a local attorney here in Coeur d'Alene who specializes in personal injury case. And we brought that lawsuit on a theory of negligent supervision, training, and monitoring of the conduct of security forces that were used routinely on the Aryan Nation's compound. Most of the time, or often at least, they were also armed, and they were armed, of course, on that night in question when they chased down the Kenans in their little car. That resulted on September the 7th at 5:05 p.m. a judgment against the Aryan Nations, Richard Butler, the corporation that owned the land, and other defendants, a total judgment of $6.3 million.
By a 12-member jury?
By a 12-member jury, a unanimous verdict of the 12 members, 11 of which were white and 1 of which was a person of color. And we're in the process now of rendering that verdict into money as quickly as we can, pursuant to the rules of the state of Idaho. But from a civil rights point of view, taking off my lawyer hat and putting on my civil rights hat, the metaphoric value of a jury such as this rendering a verdict as they did against an avowed racist, hate-filled entity as the Aryan Nations is and will represent a turning point in the history of civil rights in the state of Idaho, as in the Northwest, in my opinion.
So a follow-up question is that, and again, like you said, we're taping this somewhat earlier than it's airing, and that may have been processed by then, but one of the very likely outcomes is that all the property that this organization has had for 27 years and all the activities from that will not exist any longer as the property of the Aryan Nations.
Yeah, the present plans are that if certain motions that are before the court are denied, and I fully expect them to be denied, that the Kenans will have the deed to that real property sometime in the month of October, year 2000, and along with all of the personal property that's presently located on the compound. And the Kenans will, in fact, own the very facility from which the security forces were residing at when they chased the Kenans down 2 years ago. And the significance of that is that as we learn through this process of litigating this case, is that this physical entity of the compound housed some very violent people and sometimes they would stay there for long periods of time, and they will not have lodging in North Idaho anymore. I don't think anybody would house the types of people that were there that came there on a regular basis. So this idea that as the prisons of the United States empty, those people then won't be coming to the North Idaho for free lodging or partially free lodging out on Rimrock Road in Kootenai County.
Or anywhere else in Idaho.
Or anywhere else in Idaho. Those days are over,
they cannot even use in the future the name Aryan nations. That is part of this.
Part of our
city.
efforts to render this verdict and this verdict judgment into cash is to take the name of the Aryan nations and the name of the two publications put out by the Aryan nations, the magazine Calling Our Nation and the magazine called The Way, which is the magazine that was distributed to the prison populations in the United States.
This is very, very significant. Ken, as a person residing in Boise and also, as I said, the director of the Association of Idaho Cities, what kind of reaction do you have and what kind of reaction the cities had? What implications do you see from what Norm Gissel just talked about, dealing with our topic today, the future of human rights in Idaho? What does it do for us in our state?
Tony, the first reaction I have is just one of immense gratitude. I think, speaking for all of the residents of the state of Idaho, tremendous thank you to Norm Gissel, to Mrs. Kenan, to you, Tony, personally, to Marshall Mint, and the others who for so many years who have been doing so much to purge our state of this kind of hate group and doing so much to promote human rights and dignity and respect. And I just have the powerful feeling, Tony, that the blessings that we enjoy today in the state of Idaho and that future generations will enjoy, our children and grandchildren, are really built upon the sacrifices that have been made by some very wonderful, dedicated, patriotic human rights advocates here with the Kootenai County Task Force. And I think that this is a historic event. I think this is an event that will be talked about for generations to come, will be taught in school classrooms. It's an item of discussion around family dinner tables. And I think people, when they're kneeling in prayer, are going to offer gratitude for the wonderful work that's been done by the human rights workers here with the Kootenai County Task Force.
You're very kind, Ken, and I know all those that is direct that greatly appreciate your words. As you talk to city officials around the state, you know, it's early yet, at least when we're taping the program, you know, it has to still be absorbed about what all's happened and significance, but how do you see cities maybe using this really victory for human rights and not having Idaho to have a haven where people come in, are taught certain very hateful messages and then going out and committing violent acts? How does cities see that they may be able to use this in a very positive way, this victory?
And it will be used in a very positive way. I mean, the jury spoke for all of the voices around the state in terms of this message about purging our state of hate. But think of the disruption that happens in a community, the discord and the fear that exists where there's hate groups and violence, and where now I think city officials are committed to creating just the opposite of that. Communities that are welcoming, that are inclusive. Mayors recognize that it's much easier to govern in that climate where there's a feeling of belongingness and dignity and respect. And I think what's happened here with this work and the jury decision will motivate municipal leaders to promote human rights, and will, I think, around the state and even now as we speak, Tony, city leaders are looking to develop human rights commissions, task forces, and using the good work that's been done here as a model.
We had, as one of our guests on this program, the mayor of Burley, Idaho, some time ago, and I noticed that he was holding a function in his city that was dealing with this question too.
Yes, in fact, the city of Boise, the city of Burley, under Mayor Doug Manning, will be hosting a city human rights summit on November 3rd of this year.
So that's more evidence of what's happening and the momentum that is there. Marshall, I want to turn to you because I have great admiration for you. You've always stood up for what we're talking about today. You've been a victim of that process because you stood up. And in fact, it came out in the trial that there was an attempt by one of the members of the Aryan nations to leave the compound and come to your business or maybe even to your home and set off a Molotov cocktail. And they were stopped by the police or something else, and they did not do so. And this is only one example of a number of times. And I have a two-part question because of your courageous and fortitude your courage and fortitude that you have for the right thing. My first question is very personal. How do you personally feel about the victory and this really difficult challenge you've had over the years?
The victory of the lawsuit?
Yes.
I think it's probably one of the best things that ever happened in the state of Idaho. I think it's going to change our state. I think it's going to change our image, and it's going to change the quality of life of the people who live in North Idaho.
And I know that you like to talk about, obviously, the future of the state. No, but you can always disregard my question, but I just have such admiration for how
Did
you
I
stood
dance
up.
around it, Tony?
How you personally
I learned
feel.
that from my attorney. Personally, how I felt about it, I was glad to see that I was surprised that that my business was going to be firebombed. I was not aware of that until right before the trial started. It was 2 years prior to that was going to happen. And the fact that, Richard Butler gave him the bottle to make the Molotov cocktail, I thought was quite a shock. And it was not a real comforting feeling to think about that. I had a couple of other instances where I had the FBI come to my house over the years and tell me I was a target for assassination. That was not a comfortable feeling either. But you know what? We just keep on keeping on, and we keep on going. And it's tough to stand up sometimes, and it's tough not so much for yourself, but for your family members. And when you have your family telling you, gee, maybe you better not do anything, and what about your children? What about your relatives and things like that? And I think that's what happened in Nazi Germany, that people didn't stand up because that's the kind of story that they listen to. And we can't listen to that kind of stuff. We have to stand up and we have to speak out. And sometimes it's not real comfortable to do it. But if we don't do it, silence gives consent. And if we're silent, these people are not going to go away. They're going to stay there, and they're going to keep doing what they're doing, and they're going to keep promoting the hatred that they're promoting. And we didn't keep silent. We spoke up, and we've been speaking up for 20 years now. And we're going to keep on speaking up and speaking out.
That's what Ken was referring to when you were talking about what people have done like Marshall. And so that's made a difference.
And Tony, if I could just add to that people around the state of Idaho and our community leaders are really motivated to hear the personal stories of Marshall Mend and others, and they're real stories of courage, tremendous courage. And sharing this will help other communities to deal with hate groups and to deal with those things that divide and discriminate and harm other people.
Norm, in the next show, I'm really looking forward to getting into some of the constitutional consequences of all of this. And you're our historian, on the task force. You're such an incredible reader, and you give a lot of speeches from the historical viewpoint. But with the short time we have left on the program, give us a little more insight to what Marshall and Ken is talking about. You've represented not only the Kenans, but over the years we've sent a number of victims to you, and you've always been there. And I do want to say something publicly for you and Ken Howard and the Southern Part Law Center. A lot of people don't know this. In your case, it's been 2 years. You've done all this free. You've served, and it's not the first time you've done that. You're not getting anything financially out of this, but well, what a victory in other ways. But tell us a little more about, as an attorney and as a friend of the victims, what all of that, what that's like and what this means for not only the Kenans but other victims.
Well, I can't really speak for the Kenans. I mean, it's unfair for me to try to do that, but I've spent a lot of time with them, and you have to understand the Kenans to understand the plight that they were in. The Kenans were, and this was a mother and her 19-year-old son at the time, and they were people who chose a rural lifestyle for themselves. Part of the charm of Idaho, as everybody knows, is that there is plenty of room and that we can choose a rural lifestyle for ourselves if we want to. We buy a piece of property out in the country and live there relatively inexpensively for a good long period of time. And the Kenans had chosen that type of lifestyle, and they were totally unfamiliar with the politics of the Nazis or of any other type of politics for that matter. And when they were thrust into this, when they were shot at and when they were brutalized, they entered a world that they were unprepared to meet and had no knowledge of, and were traumatized in substantial material and subsisting ways. They suffered post-traumatic stress syndrome, very similar to the experiences of people that suffer through a calamitous occurrence in the military. And so they were indeed shocked and injured through this process. And then to be involved in this litigation, which was high-profile litigation, which was aired throughout the world, really, when the results of this came about. What it told the Kenans was that for them, as poor as they were, and as innocent as they were in a way, that there were champions for them. There were lawyers that would litigate their claims and would press their claims and seek justice for them. And this was a validation for them. This was a sense of justice that they had never experienced and maybe never will experience again. But for that moment in time, they knew justice.
On that note, we have to bring the permanent conclusion. It impacted them forever. But the good news is we're back next week, and Norm, we're going to pick up on that with you as we start the second program. And ladies and gentlemen, it's great to know that we'll have these three guests next week, and they're all three, as you know, most articulate on dealing not only with how this case has changed things for the future in Idaho, but we're going to be talking about other things, as we did on this program, of how both private organizations, civil rights groups, and governmental entities are working together. And I should add, North Idaho College is an example of a partnership in some of these programs of conferences, and we shall continue that topic, the future of human rights in Idaho, next week. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guests.
I am most pleased to welcome you back to part 2 of our 2-week series that we're discussing the future of human rights in Idaho. And I'm so pleased to welcome back all 3 guests that we had last week. All 3 are very good friends, and all 3 are very much in the forefront of dealing with this subject, and they all have an important role to play in the future of this very important aspect of Idaho and its people. I first of all welcome to the program Marshall Mend, who's a longtime friend. He's one of the founders and original board members of the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations, established in 1981, and it still is in very much existence, and Marshall is still on the board. Marshall, welcome back to the program. We enjoyed our interview last week and look forward to the interview this week.
It's great to be back, Tony.
Thank you. And I'm equally so happy to have Ken Harwood with us, who's the Executive Director of the Association of Idaho Cities. And Ken, we so enjoyed your comments last week, and again commend you and the association for what you have done, and excited about the plans that you have in place for the future of our people in Idaho, for the dignity of all our people and inclusion of all within our state.
Well, thank you, Tony. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
And equally, my very good friend, Norm Gissel, who is an attorney and is on the board of both the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations and the Human Rights Education Foundation. And Norm has received so much attention, and rightly so, recently for the successful lawsuit by his plaintiffs, along with other attorneys, in the Kenans versus the Aryan nations. And again, Norm, congratulations, and welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me back, Tony.
When we finish the program, on this program, as all television programs, the clock always wins. And we weren't quite through. For our viewers who are tuning back in this week, you were in the process of discussing what happens to victims, as happened to not only your clients in this case, but in a number of others that you've helped over the years that have faced malicious harassment or violence. Would you continue explaining that to our viewers?
Okay. What I was talking about last week was the idea that the Kenans, where they were in this society, not wealthy, living in a rural atmosphere, in a rural place, were victims of very violent acts, and they were terrified, and they suffered grievously at the hands of these security guards of the Aryan Nation compound. The thing that stood out for the Kenans through this whole process, and particularly following the verdict, was that justice could be done for them, no matter what their station in life was. That justice could be done if you were a victim, such as they were. And in the larger sense, if the Kenans have this sense of justice now, and that the system works for them, all other victims similarly situated throughout the Northwest, but particularly in Idaho, can know that there can be justice for them when they are harassed by racists such as existed out there at the compound. And I think that is a very important message that will be carried forward from this court decision onward into the future of the state of Idaho.
Ken, on the last program, you were speaking from a historical perspective also, and you talked about how you felt this and other things are being done in some organizations, and the things that they're putting in place will affect future generations. I'd follow up on that by indicating that since you have such a good feel across the state, because you're in contact with cities in every corner of the state, and there have been victims in other parts of the state. We know that some members of the Hispanic community have faced certain problems over time. And what are you hearing, and what does this mean to other people that there's no place that's totally free of prejudice? But at the same time, the people of Idaho are very good, decent people. And again, as Marshall has said, unfairly stereotyped because of what one small group did in this state by being here, the Aryan nations. So what do you see coming out of this for other communities as it relates to people, and what kind of relief that they feel?
Well, there is a real sense of relief, but accompanied with that, Tony, I think, is a desire to be introspectively, causing each of us kind of look into the chambers of our own soul and ask ourselves where do we fit, where have we in the past, where are we now being discriminatory or prejudiced, and I think it motivates us to want to do better, to really deeply care about others and treat others with dignity. In fact, it was just earlier today, I had a telephone conversation with Mayor Brent Coles, Mayor of Boise, currently the President of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. He had just completed reading Bill Wasmuth's book, Hate is My Neighbor, and he was telling me that that's taught him and motivated him now to be ever more committed to dealing with human rights in his role, in his community in Boise, our capital city, and even on the national stage where he now has a presence in talking about human rights issues. So I think it's having an impact in every area of the state, that there's a greater sensitivity and a greater desire to do better.
I really appreciate your words. I've interviewed with many national commentators and news outlets, and I've said to them over time, because of what we faced here in North Idaho, that there were probably no places in America where people are more sensitive to the question than here because of what they have faced. And so I hear you saying that both in political leaders and the general population, that this trial too has been another opportunity for people to deal with questions. And I've had a lot of examples where people are very supportive and very sensitive to the dignity of people, that they've learned from this process that this is the way to deal with life and to reject the hate itself.
Right, and Tony, I think it's causing community leaders to really come to terms with how morally repugnant any notion of racial superiority or hate or violence, and also to look for where those conditions now are existing in communities. Because to some degree they exist everywhere, and it will lead Idaho to become a better place to work, to live, to raise a family, where people will be treated with dignity.
I appreciate those words because I like to stay with my theme, and the theme is the future of human rights in Idaho. And I hear you saying that this whole question and the whole world was watching as this trial took place and the jury's decision. So you're saying that part of the future is that we will just really be, as a people, already Idahoans, a good people, will even be more introspective in dealing with welcoming people.
Yes, Tony, and I appreciate what Marshall said on last week's program about having a symbol in front of us, perhaps being known as the human rights state in the nation. And also to, I guess another reason for such optimism, the committed human rights advocates now working closely with municipal leaders around the state, and the tremendous commitment by Greg Carr to this effort, and through the Greg Carr Foundation to support financially and with his energy and commitment to this issue, I think really will move the movement forward.
And he's a native of Idaho, but has a center at Harvard, and so he's carrying through his work and all information, the message across America about what we're doing. Marshall, I know that one thing that you would like to talk about is in this same arena. You've given a lot of speeches in which you talked about some of the doctrines and ideas of hate groups, but you also asked people to look at themselves. Would you like to comment in that arena?
You bet. We all need to look at ourselves, and us included. I mean, we all have our little prejudices, and some of us prejudice against people because of the color of their skin, others maybe for a religious basis or for where a person comes from. There are even some people that judge people by the amount of hair they have on their head. They think people without a lot of hair are brilliant and beautiful, wonderful people. And in that case, most of the time they're right, Tony. I want to share that with you.
You don't fail to get that in, do you, Marshall?
But we really need to judge people as individuals, and we need to judge them for the content of the person and not by the color of their skin, as Martin Luther King said. And when we do that, it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference not only for the other person, but it makes a big difference for you, the person who's doing the judging. And a lot of times we hear people talk about a certain group of people, and that the reason they don't like that group of people. Well, there's no such thing as, not liking a group of people. If you don't like a group of people, there's not something wrong with a group of people. There's something wrong with the person who's not doing the liking. That's where the problem is, and that's the part that needs to be fixed. And it's not, the world doesn't have to change. We have to change ourselves, and we have to change our attitudes, and we have to change the way that we look at people.
The local human rights groups, the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations and the Human Rights Education Foundation, have worked a lot in the field of education. I know that's one of your areas you're interested in. Would you take a moment to share for the future what you see those local organizations as well as others across the state? We're more and more doing this across the state with Harwood's organization and other human rights groups. What do you see in the field of education to address this question in the state of Idaho? And of course, we're even across the border now working with Washington, the Hands Across the Border projects. What are some of your dreams there?
Educating our youth is important. Educating our adults is real important too, but educating our youth is even more important. Our youth, as they're growing up, and we're talking to some of the kids in high school and kids in college, and when you're talking to them, they are so much more tolerant than their parents or their parents' parents of people that are different. We need to teach people to appreciate the differences in people.
We're short on time always on permits, but why don't you also take a moment to talk about the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations project with spokesman View. Actually, Ken Sands, it's his idea.
It's a wonderful idea.
As one of the editors. That's a future project too.
The future project of talking about people that are, they're going to keynote, or not keynote, but feature people of different races, of different backgrounds on a regular basis. They're also going to be doing some programs in the schools, and the one in the schools is really, really powerful.
And that's both Washington and Idaho.
That's Washington and Idaho, and it is a powerful, powerful program. They had they'll have 3 or 4 speakers. Josh Bruner's one of them, Ken Sands is another one. There's a couple of other speakers that will be speaking out. There's a young man from Plummer who studied the Holocaust. In fact, the task force gave him a grant to go to Israel and study, and he's going to be talking about the Holocaust. And if you get a chance to see that, if you ever get a chance, if they're speaking at a school that your kids go to, and you get a chance to go see these people speak, definitely go see them speak. It is just an amazing program. It is great. You walk out of there a different person after you listen to those folks.
Thank you very much. Norm, back to you. Some people, and I'm sure well-meaning, not knowing the facts that you know of the case, have brought up the question, had the Kenan versus Aryan Nations case resulted in any chilling of the First Amendment's free speech? Would you address that, please?
I will. First of all, to use a phrase first articulated by you, as speech can never be used as a shield for criminal activity or for any sort of racist activity where somebody is physically assaulted. Freedom of speech is the communication of ideas. It isn't the communication of a physical assault. That's obvious. In this case, the basis of the lawsuit in the Kenan matter was the negligent hiring and retention and training and supervision of armed security guards. And the punitive damage aspect of that case, which was large, was the utter indifference with which the leaders of the Aryan nations discharged their duty of training these guards. There was no training at all. There was no supervision at all. They simply gave these people guns, or they carried guns onto the compound and they let them be armed and walking around the compound. And they went off the compound, which was in violation of some sort of rules they had there at the Aryan Nations compound. And so that's got nothing to do with freedom of speech. That has everything to do with gross negligence. And so freedom of speech is alive and well. And as an example of that, the day following the jury verdict, Mr. Butler went down to the city of Coeur d'Alene and asked for a parade permit for I think the 28th of October of year 2000, and that was granted to him. So his freedom of speech rights are as well protected as my own.
So none of the defendants were on trial because they had assembled or said anything, but because of some actual actions that took place that were criminal.
That's correct.
Thank you. Ken, I'll come back to you and talk in those terms. Idahoans are very independent people, and that's a nice quality, in a democratic society. And they have always lived under pretty much the concept, live and let live. If you don't bother me, I won't bother you. But how are we looking now around Idaho and I know there's a great joy in this victory, but is that concept understood that we do not tolerate turning people into victims under any guise of anything that might be political if you actually take the action? Are you hearing any input on that?
Yes, we are, Tony. There's a lot of discussion about that around the state, a greater sensitivity and watching for when that crosses that line from speech to action and violence and harassment of people. Also, I think an increased sensitivity, even where there's maybe not the violence in terms of physical assault, but any demeaning statement that harms another person. Just recently in Idaho Falls, there was a community prayer-a-thon bringing people together. In other parts of the state, there are now efforts being done to bring together the Hispanic and non-Hispanic community, building bridges and healing some hurts that have existed in the past.
You mentioned on our first program the mayor of Burley, Idaho, hosting a summit on human rights. That's really exciting. What other kinds of activities are you, as really the leader of the association, in the sense that you're there each day and you have a wonderful staff that I'm very impressed with? What are some of the suggestions that are going out from your office or coming in from different cities of other things that may be in the planning stages in all parts of the state that deal with how we work together in a community spirit?
So some of the specific things that are now being put in place, Tony, would be to train all city officials on human rights. That would be elected and key appointed officials. Special training done for police officers on human rights. Community coalitions now, where it includes city leaders, school leaders, faith community leaders, business and other nonprofits linking arms now to sponsor events and promote human rights education. And I think one of the very best things that we'll be able to do would be to cooperatively work with the Human Rights Education Center in Boise with Marilyn Schuler as the president of that organization, and certainly here with the Human Rights Education Foundation, jointly doing things together. And many of the resources that you have through tape programs and educational programs, we want to get more city leaders in the chairs in those workshops.
That's just music to our ears. With that kind of extensive planning, it sends a message around the United States that I think is twofold. I'll just get your reaction to that. One is it would certainly encourage people to both visit and live here who are from very diverse backgrounds and different cultures. And may I add a footnote to that? The task force recently sent an open letter to a paper welcoming General Powell here when he came to a conference. And in that letter, it was stated that this was the state that elected the first person of Jewish ancestry as a governor of a state. It was the first state in America to elect an attorney general that was Native American. It was the third state to give women the right to vote. So there is a history there.
There's a history, and I think even some of the more strict laws dealing with malicious harassment pioneered in that area.
So as that message becomes more clear around the country, now that the sensational activities of a hate group is been dealt with in the court, that may increase that. The second thing is that those who are looking for a haven for their hate, this sends a message that Idaho would not be a good place to come.
That's absolutely correct. That sends that kind of a message. It would not be a good place to come.
Mm-hmm. Marshall, back to you on the other, between the programs, actually, we talked about this. Morse Dees, who was here and successful with the lawsuit with Norm Gissel and Ken Howard and the rest of the staff at Southern Poverty Center, at the press conference, he got very excited about a proposal for another project. Morse Dees reminds me of myself in many cases. It's always another 20 projects on the table. Tell us what he proposed and the possibility of having that new development in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
He planted the seed in our minds of a center for tolerance in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I believe that we will have a center for tolerance in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And the Center for Tolerance is going to be a place where we can help teach ourselves to be tolerant. And the only thing that we need to be intolerant to is we need to be intolerant to intolerance and to hatred and to bigotry and to racism and to violence. The Center for Tolerance, I think, is going to be something that we'll see here, and I think we'll see it in the future. One of the things that Morse Dees has is one of his programs is Teaching Tolerance, which is a free program for any school district, I believe, in the world that they'll send it to. All they have to do is just request the materials, and they have some fabulous videos. 2 of them I know have won Academy Awards. They're set up for classroom time, and they have 2 for junior high and high school, and then they have 1 now for young children in grammar school called Starting Small. And it's just, teaching tolerance, teaching us to appreciate the differences in our fellow human beings.
Thank you very much. Norm, I'm going to tap your history background again. For our viewers who don't know, Norm Gissel speaks to a lot of groups in even other states, and he's got a real grasp on the history of human rights, also hate group movement, and he likes to take that information, I know you do, Norm, and then project it towards some possible visionary ideas for the future. I'd like for you to take advantage of the opportunity with our viewers to talk about everything we've been talking about today, and in particular the end result of the court case. As we look down the road in the future, and a lot of things we won't know until then, but if you were looking back on this from 40 or 50 years from now, what might you or someone else at that point say about this and its impact into the future?
Well, I think that what will happen when they write the history of these times, and there will be a history of these times because these are interesting times, there's 2 things that happened in the United States, and one was the announcement by the geneticists that they had finished mapping the human genome, and the conclusion was, and we knew that for some time what the conclusion was going to be, but the conclusion was, it was announced to the world, that the human race, all of us, from one end of this world to the other, are 99.9% alike. And that the differences, this 1/10 of 1% of a difference that we hold for ourselves that makes each individual unique, does not involve race. And that race and the color of people's skins is a continuum that has no genetic importance. So in other words, race is a social construct, and that racism is a fiction based on a fiction. That if race is a fiction and doesn't have a true scientific basis to us, racism doesn't either. We have this revelation. It is Galilean in its importance. It is a hugely important statement for the history of mankind. Then we have one further example of rejecting racism just purely on the basis of its immorality. And you merge those 2 ideas together, and you can look back from 50 years later into the future, and you look back on these times, and you will see that what is out there is the beginning of the end of racism worldwide. If there is nothing but a social construct that we've created because of the way our societies have formed historically, there's no real difference in mankind, and we see this idea of racism rejected. And the history of civil rights in the last 40 years has been a history of success, and this is one element of that successful history in America. And other societies will also work on their own racist identities, and I think that we will see a turning point that would started in the year 2000. And I'm really hopeful, and I think that they will look back and just be remark in surprise and shock at how much effort we have to put into this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So eloquently said. Ken, in 40 years or 50 years, if you were looking at what was being recorded, what would you want to be said about these developments, in this case, and what the plans in Idaho? What do you hope is said?
Well, we would hope we would look back and say this was a time of really a watermark on the history of Idaho, and from this point forward, Idaho is a better place to live. There is a treatment of dignity and respect to the people in Idaho, and we've purged ourselves of malicious hate groups, and we've developed a sense of community and inclusiveness and respect for, and that we've learned how to peacefully resolve the other tensions that exist.
On that note, I want to thank you. I want to say to all three of you that history will be kind to you. I'm convinced of that, and others who are like you that have pioneered so many important issues. Again, thank all three of you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a special privilege for me to host these three guests the last 2 weeks. I hope you've enjoyed viewing the program as much as I've enjoyed producing it for you. And I want to assure you that we will continue to discuss a number of important issues in the future as we're going down that road of the 29th year of the North Idaho College Public Forum. It's a pleasure bringing it to you. Again, next week we'll discuss yet another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart. So enjoy doing it.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.